Tired of doing investment research on stock markets? Wants to go for a walk outside the house with a friend? Introducing iCapital, where you can get investment advice on the go. It is accessible via app and website. Subscribe now to iCapital for stock news. iCapital is reliable because they thoroughly research listed companies, economies, and stock markets. iCapital provides a clear perspective of how markets interact and how it influences your investment. When investors and traders are debating whether to buy or sell their stocks, fret not, as iCapital will recommend Malaysian and global stocks. iCapital is available on Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and Huawei App Gallery.
Hi everyone, good morning to you guys. This is Ting Wu from Capital Dynamics, and just in case those of you who do not know, I'm also an adjunct professor at University Technology of Sydney. Today our topic is, not only is it interesting, it's extremely important, especially for the longer term future of Malaysian economy and your longer term future. So please listen carefully, and it will not be 15-20 minutes, it will be a bit long because the topic is vast and complex and extremely important. But before I go into all the details, the arguments, the reasoning as to why the Malaysian government should defer the KL Singapore high-speed rail project, before I go into that, before I share with you my research, let me just give you an investment advice. For those of you who have been watching the share price of iCapital.biz Berhad, it's a fund listed on Bursa Malaysia, stock code 5108. The share price has performed extremely well in the last 6 to 12 months. It was about 2 ringgit not too long ago. Recently it went up to, I think, about 350. So many people benefited a lot, but I would just need to remind you all out there, be a patient investor. Don't chase stock prices. When the price keeps going up, don't chase the price unless, of course, you're prepared to hold for the very long term. It's best that you buy during correction, patiently during correction, which is what is happening. The last few days, the share price has dropped, I think, about 7-8%. So during this correction, the sellers are willing to give it to you instead of you chasing the sellers. So just stay there, accumulate, and hold it for the long term. So that's the investment advice that I would like to share with you before I go on to this extremely important subject matter. Right? Okay, let's take a look at the headlines. It says, Malaysian government reopens KL Singapore high-speed rail project. Now, this was last year, right? And let me just share with you a question, a very important question from one of our followers. Can we take a look at what he asked? It's from Ruben Ho. Can we have a look at his question? He says, I'm just wondering if I can pose a question for me in advance, hoping it may have a chance to get mentioned in this upcoming YouTube video. In my previous video, I praised the Indonesian high-speed rail project, specifically the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail project, or WHOOSH. So, Mr. Ruben Ho is asking, why is it a big no-no for Malaysia when I, not too long ago, praised the Indonesian high-speed rail project? Very good question, very important question. So I will explain as simply and as clearly as I possibly can. Pay attention, don't fall asleep, because it could be a bit complex and long. Okay, now the project to construct this 350-kilometer high-speed rail is expected to cost, by now, the cost of construction has gone up to about 120 billion ringgit or 25 odd billion US dollars. By any standards, this is a huge amount. The Jakarta-Bandung was only about 7 odd billion US dollars. And it is coming at a time when possibly the Malaysian government may think that it wants to boost Malaysia's economic growth. And also in case the global economic situation is still very uncertain, in case there's a sharp slowdown in US or even the recession in US, and if China, the growth momentum doesn't get a speed, then the Malaysian government may look at this particular project to help boost economic growth. I mean, that's just my thinking. I'm not sure whether that's what it is, but I would say that forget about this. Forget about this high-speed rail project. I call it HSR, between KL and Singapore. Let me just understand what the thinking is like, what the potential benefits are expected from this project. According to the Datuk Sri Haji Fauzi, he is the chairman of the HSR Berhad, the company that's going to develop and run the HSR. This project will bring tremendous benefits to the people, particularly in enhancing and expanding economic dynamism from the Klang Valley to the southern corridor of the peninsula and eventually to the rest of Malaysia. That statement, I agree somewhat and I disagree most of it. The enhancing and expanding the economic dynamism along the HSR corridor from Klang Valley to Singapore, that's probably true. It will boost economic growth, especially during construction of this massive infrastructure project. GDP, headline GDP growth will look better, will look good. The part that I don't agree is where it says tremendous benefits to the people. I think it's got to be qualified, because I don't think the rest of the country outside the HSR corridor will get to enjoy much of the benefits. And eventually to the rest of Malaysia, this is where I differ very, very fundamentally. I think the longer term consequence of this KL Singapore high-speed rail project would be, there'll be more negatives than positive. In fact, I think if we go ahead with this, probably Malaysia will be even more stuck in the middle income trap, instead of, like what the person here says, eventually benefiting the rest of Malaysia. That part worries me a lot. The part where it says providing a new travel option that is safer, faster, more efficient, and sustainable, totally agree. Right? Whenever you look at well-built, well-designed, well-maintained high-speed rail networks, that is true. Very low accident rate, very punctual, and very efficient. The part where it says generating long-term growth and sustainability for the people, again, I totally disagree. My own research, my own analysis tells me that it probably will lead to massive negative consequences for Malaysia and the ordinary Malaysians. Now, the important difference I would like to make and that I would like to explain is this. Most of us, in fact all of us, when you read the newspaper, when you read social media, you're focused on GDP growth, economic growth, economic growth. What is inadequate, what is incomplete with that preoccupation, with that obsession, is that we forget about economic development. There are huge differences between achieving economic growth and achieving economic development, especially high quality economic development. Now, economic growth is a very narrow concept. It is usually looked at GDP growth, GDP per capita, whereas economic development is a very broad, comprehensive concept which covers not just the economic growth, the GDP growth, but the distribution of it. How is the growth, how is the wealth created, distributed among the different segments of the Malaysian society? Because economic growth without proper economic development can lead to worsening of income and wealth inequality. You might have situations where economic growth without proper economic development can lead to a lot more negative consequences, especially in the medium to long term. Now, Malaysia's GDP per capita is about 12 to 13,000 US dollars. That is considered as middle income by global standards. That GDP per capita in Malaysia has been there for many years. Malaysia has been stuck at that level. It is in a middle income trap. Middle income trap means that the country, the economy, cannot benefit from low cost, low wages workers that are in abundant supply, because we don't have that anymore. But at the same time, it also means that our economy is not technologically competitive. We are not able to move up the value chain, either in the services sector or in the manufacturing activities. So we cannot compete with the likes of Taiwan, Korea, Japan, or even China. So you're trapped. You don't have the low cost, low wage, abundant supply of workers, which means you cannot produce shirts, shoes, tires anymore. But at the same time, you cannot move up to the high quality, high price, high value add products because you don't have the human capital. So that is middle income trap. And from early 1960s, based on my memory, there are about, I think, close to 100 economists that were at middle income level. 40, 50 years later, out of that 90 to 100 middle income countries, only 4 or 5 of them succeeded in moving out of the middle income trap. South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan. Most other, the huge majority, the Brazil, the Argentina, the South Africa, the Philippines, are all stuck at the middle income trap and not only stagnated, but they have also declined. So Malaysia is at a very crucial level, the 12, 13,000 US dollars, and if the current government makes the wrong decisions, then we're going to stagnate for a long time. If the current government makes wise, far-sighted decisions, then 10, 20, 30 years from now, Malaysia, the economy, the whole country would succeed in terms of better standards of living, better quality of life, and your currency, your ringgit can even appreciate. So the distinction between economic growth and economic development is fundamental in understanding why the KL-Singapore high-speed rail project will not benefit Malaysia. Yeah, so you can read whatever we have shown you what economic growth is. The benefits of economic growth very often can be wasted through corruption or retained by a small elite group in the society, or the economic growth can harm the environment and affect people's living standards. Now, what is economic development? It looks at a wide range of social economic statistics, not just economic, because you cannot measure your success or failure by just pure data, right? It looks at the actual living standards of the ordinary people, the opportunities, the accessibility, and the freedom they have to enjoy a good standard of living. It means improvement in your quality of life, for example, levels of literacy, standards of education, right? Your life expectancy, the levels and quality of the country's healthcare, the quality and availability of public and private housing, levels of environmental standards. So it's very wide. You will know when you have gone into a country that has successfully developed economically. You can feel it, you can see it, you will know. So the infrastructure, the connectivity must also be improved to ensure that Malaysia achieves economic development. This is especially important for regions that have been cut off, for whatever the reasons may be, from the main areas of economic growth. For example, regions around Ipoh has been pretty stagnant for a long time. Regions around Alor, Kota Baru, and so on, they are cut off from the Klang Valley. So while the Klang Valley has been progressing, these areas, if you buy a house in Alor for 30 years, I don't think you make much money. Same thing for Kota Baru, same thing for Ipoh, and quite a number of other areas. So economic development also deals with regional disparity. Because if you have only Klang Valley that's super rich, super high income, it will distort your GDP per capita, and therefore your country may look high income, whereas in effect majority of people are not enjoying that. So remember, economic growth versus economic development. The KL-Singapore HSR project will, especially during the construction period, will lead to higher GDP growth, headline GDP growth, but it will produce, in the long term, many negative side effects. Just to give you a simple example of growth versus development. You want to have growth? You get 1 million low-skilled, low-wage foreign workers. You have growth. Development, quality economic development, you get 1,000, 10,000 highly globally talented engineers and scientists who can ensure that Malaysia can have its own wafer foundry, like Samsung or TSMC and so on, where your salaries go up, your value added also goes up. That is development. Now, to achieve that, you need good schools, good healthcare, right? Good connectivity between different areas of the country, good communications infrastructure, and of course, the quality of the human capital to be able to utilize all these facilities to produce high quality, high value added products or services. So that is growth and development. Now, the KL-Singapore high-speed rail project will lead to a situation where particularly Klang Valley, the pressures on Klang Valley will increase tremendously. Cost of living in Klang Valley will go up. Can you imagine if you say that the KL Singapore HSR will lead to better connectivity where you only need 90 minutes to reach KL? Can you imagine those high-income Singaporeans when they come here? They could, for them, renting a property of 1,000 ringgit is super cheap. 1,000 ringgit is only about less than 300 Sing dollar. In Singapore, if you want to rent a room without aircon, without all the utilities, it will cost you, in an average location, it costs you 600 to 800 Sing dollar, or even 1,000. If you need an aircon and so on and so forth, it can go 1,000 plus Sing dollar. So here, you come here, 1,000 ringgit. What about shopping? What about food? What about healthcare? When I was in Singapore and Indonesia, a lot of them say they come to Penang and KL for their medical purposes because healthcare in Malaysia is good and super cheap. So now you have connectivity that is punctual, reliable, and fast. How many of them will come? Don't we already have public and private infrastructure that is already overloaded, that we are not able to cope and handle? Recently, you read about these doctors in the Ang Pang Specialist Hospital, where the turnover of doctors is super high. It's like within a week or something like that, 20 doctors resign because conditions are so bad. So that is without these high-income foreigners coming down to the Klang Valley because it's so efficient now. I am worried because we meaning the ordinary Malaysians, we are already facing a situation where cost of living has gone up. A lot of things have gone up. The ringgit has dropped. And yet, we are now going to add additional pressure which will worsen the woes that we, ordinary Malaysians, have to cope with in Klang Valley or anywhere along the corridor of the HSR project. We wrote in 2022 in our newsletter iCapital, the millions of residents in the Klang Valley have suffered aplenty. In fact, they have been suffering for a long time. And then, unfortunately, their sufferings have worsened over the years. We've got a lot of water cuts, floodings, and so on and so forth, and response from the various Malaysian governments has always been just mere lip service. Klang Valley, this is the quote from our newsletter, home to millions of Malaysians, has consistently been raped and damaged by bad, indifferent urban designing and planning, underpinned by rampant corruption and an administrative system where the big property owners, property developers, contractors, and politicians are our overlords. Urban design and planning for the Klang Valley exists to provide whatever little legitimacy or camouflage they can to provide a public administrative system that has rotted to its core. This about 2 years ago. Has our urban planning, our traffic jams, the huge malls that you see being built everywhere, the situation hasn't improved. And now we're going to have the Klang Valley more efficiently connected to Singapore. I really dread to think of the consequences. Next. Right? during festivals, during school holidays, our highways are always jammed. Whether it's North-South, whether it's KL Kara, whether it's KL to JB, whatever it is, they are all like super jam. I remember this year or last year, there was a jam that was so bad that it lasted 7 to 9 hours. Yeah, you could say, yeah, that's the reason why we have the KL Singapore HSR project, to alleviate this problem. To an extent, that is true. The people traveling between KL, Seremban, along the HSR line, of course, can benefit from this. But you are benefiting only one segment, a very small segment of the Malaysian society, right? And by having this connectivity, this efficient connectivity, which from the Singaporean point of view will be super affordable, you're going to add a lot more passengers, commuters on the HSR. But let me come back to this in a moment as to why a better solution exists, so that you can have a situation where these problems of perpetual problems of us having to face traffic jams during holidays, during festivals, that can be solved throughout the whole country. Of course, the other major consequence is that there'll be greater brain drain from Malaysia to Singapore. There are about 1 million plus, 1.2 million Malaysians already in Singapore. And now with this efficient connectivity, you're going to make the brain drain even easier and faster. Let me just give you a very theoretical situation, right? Assuming that the HSR line is really running. So, let's say I take myself as an example. I can take the 7:30 a.m. HSR train from KL Central and reach Singapore at about 9 o'clock in time to start work. Okay, I work the whole day in Singapore, earn my money, my salary in Sing dollar, then I can take the 6:30 p.m. high-speed rail train from Singapore and be home in KL by 8 p.m. and have dinner, cheap dinner in ringgit. Now, given that the KL Singapore HSR is supposed to be high-speed and efficient, for a Malaysian commuting this way would probably make more sense than for me, a Malaysian worker who lives in the Klang Valley, to be going to the office, stuck in traffic jams, facing flash floods and so on and so forth. So there is this already, you already have this mindset of wanting to go to work in Singapore because of currency, because of a few other reasons. And now the KL Singapore high-speed rail will make it so convenient, right? For the brain drain. The brain drain doesn't mean that you have to be physically in Singapore, that you have to be living there in Singapore, right? In the past, without the KL Singapore high-speed rail, yes, I have to be physically there in Singapore to benefit from it. But now, no, because of this fast-speed, efficient train linkage between the two cities, I can actually still physically sleep in Malaysia and work in Singapore. That's a brain drain. In fact, it probably will get worse. So, I'm not sure whether the Malaysian government, whether the current or the previous ones, whether they've looked at the social, political, and economic consequences of having this KL Singapore project. I don't think so, because I haven't read anything where the adverse consequences at the social level, at the economic, at the political level have been discussed. No, the funny thing is, while Malaysians are drawn to live and work in Singapore, the reverse is not true. Singaporeans are not drawn and will not be drawn to work in Klang Valley, even with the high-speed rail connection. What they'll do is they'll come in the weekend, maybe to eat, to play and shop, and push up the cost of living. Remember, people in the residents in Johor Bahru were complaining that the Singaporeans were coming and pushing up the cost of living for the Johorians. Remember the people in Malacca, right, where during the weekends, all the flood of Singaporeans will come and create traffic jams in Malacca and push up the prices. Those are situations where you got to drive a car over 3, 4, 5 hours and get caught in a jam. But with the high-speed rail, my goodness, it's so easy, right? That's what a rail connection is supposed to do. These are the benefits of a train network. And then, can we look at this? The mean average household expenditure by state. Of course, Klang Valley or Putrajaya is at the highest, and the lowest would be states like Kelantan, Kedah, Perak, Pahang, and all that. So you already have this huge disparity in purchasing power, in consumption among the different states. This is without the high-income Singaporeans coming in and worsening the situation. So the KL Singapore high-speed rail will worsen the disparity that you can see that is already in existence in Malaysia. Right? You look at, say, Perak 3009 versus KL 7008. KL Wilayah Persekutuan is double that of Perak. And I think with this fast train, high-speed train connection, the discrepancy will widen further. Poverty in urban areas in Malaysia rose. This is absolute poverty, this is not relative. But our government says that poverty eradication is a top priority for Malaysia. So how does it gel when you have this KL Singapore HSR project coming in? Economic growth, like I said, will be benefiting only for a limited period. The inequality will worsen, right? So it means that relative poverty will worsen. You look at some of the, just to show you visually how, what the condition is at this moment in time, and I can imagine it will be worse as the HSR starts operating. I think you know this for yourself, you can see it for yourself. It exists in almost every part of Malaysia. So one of the proponents of the KL Singapore high-speed rail, they always refer to the Tokyo-Osaka Shinkansen high-speed rail, or they refer to the Eurostar connection. The Eurostar is a high-speed rail network that connects 5 countries in Europe: UK, Netherlands, Germany, France, and Belgium. So the famous connections will be London to Paris, London to Amsterdam, London to Brussels, and so on. Right? These are all high-speed rail, very efficient and punctual. Now, are the proponents, are the supporters of the KL Singapore high-speed rail correct when they use Eurostar and Tokyo Osaka as evidence of why the KL Singapore high-speed rail must be constructed? I don't agree with them because they have, intentional or unintentional, I don't know, but certain key facts have been left out when they use Eurostar and Tokyo Osaka as evidence of why KL Singapore HSR should be constructed. Let's look at this figure. This is GDP per capita in 2017 prices, right? You look at 1990, Belgium, France, Germany, Netherlands, UK, these 5 countries, more or less about the same. The variance is about maybe 10%. By 2021, they're all still about the same. They've all grown, the GDP per capita, some grow faster, some grow slower, but the variance is still pretty close. Now, I hope you can see at the bottom, Malaysia and Singapore. Right? Malaysia and Singapore, in 1990, Singapore's GDP per capita was 3.7 times higher than that of Malaysia. $37,000 versus about 10,600. By 2021, the gap in the GDP per capita of Singapore and Malaysia has widened to about 4 to 4.5 times. Singapore is about 106,000, Malaysia is 26,000. How can we use Eurostar as a justification for the KL Singapore HSR? Right? Now, in the case of Tokyo, Osaka, the GDP per capita are also quite similar. So, when you have GDP per capita between the different destinations which are pretty similar, you don't face the problem of brain drain, because human talents will flow in 2 directions in these 5 developed countries. Germans will move to UK, British will move to France, the Dutch people will move to UK, and so on. And 4 of these 5 European countries have a common currency, so they don't have to worry about exchange rate differences. In contrast, the GDP per capita between Malaysia and Singapore, not only are they far apart, they're growing wider and wider. One is a developing middle income country, the other is a super high income country with a super strong currency. Guess which way the water will flow, right? Human talents in this kind of situation will flow in only one direction, right? Just like your lower income Bangladeshi will flow to higher income Malaysia, so the lower income Malaysians will flow to the higher income Singapore. That is law of nature. So how can they use Eurostar as an example of a successful high-speed rail connection? Because the circumstances, the facts are so different. And I've shown you the figures just now. The GDP per capita of the 5 European countries versus Malaysia and Singapore, we are so far apart. So this is why my belief is that I have very strong belief that this KL Singapore high-speed rail, when it is completed, Singapore will be the biggest beneficiary and Malaysia will be the biggest loser at a lot of levels, one of which is brain drain. Then let's look at Shinkansen with the famous Japan, and this is the Intercity Express in Germany. Now, this is the SNSF in France, and in now China, the high-speed rail network in China, which is the largest in the world, which has got about almost 44,000 kilometers. So why is it that this high-speed rail connectivity works, whereas I'm opposing the KL Singapore? Because in France, in China, it is domestic connectivity. In Japan, it is domestic connectivity. In the case of France, Germany, Belgium, I already mentioned to you, part of Eurostar, because Europe, EU is a common union. It's an economic and monetary union. So it's almost like one country, it's almost domestic. They don't even need passports to travel between the different countries. So you don't have the situation that Malaysia faces when the high-speed rail project is completed and linked to Singapore. It's like you have water at 2 different levels. Of course, you know the water will flow only one level. Now, what we must do, what the Malaysian government must do is abandon the KL Singapore project and focus on improving and building, developing an efficient and effective domestic high-speed rail project. Domestic, that is the key word. China is domestic, Japan is domestic, Korea is domestic. Eurostar is almost domestic. Next. Right, Tokyo, Osaka, both cities are part of Japan. Both use the same currency. Now, what the Chinese government did is, they did the right thing by improving and transforming domestic connectivity. And this connectivity was one of the major factors which transformed the Japanese economy in the 60s. The Tokyo Patterson, the vice chairman of this association, says that the Tokaido Shinkansen, which is the Osaka-Tokyo connection, right, is the contribution of this Tokaido Shinkansen to the economic growth of Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kyoto, and Osaka is undisputed. And this region, the Tokaido region, accounts for 60% of Japan's GDP and is home of Japan Inc. So this is domestic connectivity. Next. For China, regional economic disparity has been decreased since the development of high-speed rail. It has promoted regional economic convergence. In other words, if you think of it in the Malaysian context, the economic disparity between Klang Valley and, say, Kedah or Perak or Terengganu will get lesser and lesser and lesser, right? In the case of China, the study was focused on China. It says the primary economic impact of the high-speed rail is not whether HSR directly promotes GDP growth. On the contrary, the importance of the impact lies in how high-speed rail affects regional economic integration, industrial agglomeration, and the relocation of production factors such as capital and population flow. So in other words, instead of having the Klang Valley getting more and more people and getting more and more crowded, you disperse them to Ipoh, to Kuantan, to Alor, to Segamat. That is what domestic connectivity will do. Those are the benefits, right? Now, it is therefore the article, the research paper says it's important to explore the mechanism of how high-speed rail affects economic activity, such as the changes in the industrial structure, investment, and population. That means how the population is being distributed. There is a lot of domestic migration into the Klang Valley. So if you have good, efficient, and effective domestic connectivity, that will reverse. And the different parts of the country will benefit. Therefore, the whole country will benefit, and not only a narrow segment of the Malaysian society. Right? Now, if you have an effective and efficient domestic HSR or fast train means faster than 160 kilometers an hour, it will create many new mini hubs in just of relying only on the Klang Valley. You can have a mini hub in Ipoh, a mini hub in Seremban, a mini hub in Kuantan, right? And therefore reduce the heavy pressures on KL and the Klang Valley. And at the same time, promote national integration, national unity. So can you imagine, right? Let's say we got high-speed rail connection between KL and Ipoh, right? I can do the same thing. I can live in Ipoh, low-cost Ipoh, and work in KL, high-wage KL. And then after that, I go back to low-cost Ipoh. And a lot of people do that. Then very soon, the Ipoh economies will be uplifted. The pressure on the Klang Valley will be relieved. The quality of living in Klang Valley will improve. And the Ipoh, the conurbation, will get to enjoy a lot of amenities, a lot of benefits that they couldn't have enjoyed without the high-speed rail connection between KL and Ipoh. This is just an example, right? Now, based on the studies in China, high-speed rail is well suited for distances between 200 and 500 kilometers and to connect cities with population of about 500,000 or more. So in Malaysia, we have a lot of that. The distance between KL and Ipoh is 200 kilometers, KL and Penang is 300, KL and JB is about 300 plus. Perfect in distance-wise. Population, Ipoh, Penang, Butterworth, KL, Seremban, JB and all that. It's about there, it's suited, and even Kuantan. And even if you want to connect to Kota Baru, KL, Kota Baru, high-speed rail. Why not? I mean, China has got all kinds of high-speed rail connections, even in freezing temperature, even over deserts. So it can be done. This is the population of Malaysia has grown a lot. And what I want to show you is that the migration into KL is heavy, in Selangor is heavy, and Malaysia's population is going to increase again. Right? Like I said, Klang Valley now is about 8-9 million. 10 years from now it could be 15-20 million. How are you going to cope with that? And that is without the high-speed rail linkage. Next. You see, why the domestic connectivity is important? Because, for example, now in Malaysia, if I were to take a flight from Johor Bahru Senai Airport, if I'm staying in Klang, from Klang to Senai, it takes me about an hour and a half. That's just to go to the airport. But if I have efficient domestic connectivity, I don't have to do this very wasteful type of commuting. Next. Then what about the ETS? ETS is the electric train service. In Malaysia, you can only travel to 140 kilometers an hour. It is not high-speed rail, it's not even fast train, and our ETS is wholly inadequate. It is too slow, its train service is too infrequent, it is not really an intercity service at all. Between KL Central and Botol, for example, there are just too many stops. It stops in Rawang, it stops in Tanjung Malim, it stops in Tapa, it stops in so many places. There should be express non-stop service between KL, Ipoh and Botol, for example. And the train stations in these places must be substantially revamped. Even the ETS section of our KL Central is very user-unfriendly. So this is what I took recently. I went to Nibong Tebal from KL. It's empty and I had to wait for quite some time for the ETS to go back to KL. And it stops at too many stations, no express service between the larger cities. And the lift at the Bukit Mertajam, well, I disembarked from ETS. It was horrible because I had a lot of heavy bags. I was attending a career fair in Nibong Tebal. And I had to wait for this lift. And it was really 10 or 10:30 p.m. at night. So, improve our domestic connectivity. So my recommendation to the Malaysian government, stop the KL Singapore high-speed project now, and there's a much better solution, which is, look, focus on developing an efficient and effective domestic HSR, right? The KL Singapore linkage, high-speed rail linkage, will only generate limited benefits and produces many undesirable negative outcomes. The latter solution, which is to develop the domestic connectivity, will benefit the entire country and all segments of the Malaysian society. The KL Singapore HSR will ensure that Malaysia will continue to suffer from a middle income trap. Improving our domestic connectivity will help Malaysia escape from the middle income trap. So to answer Mr. Ruben Ho's question at the very beginning, why I praise Jakarta-Bandung, because Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail is domestic, is within Indonesia itself. Whereas KL Singapore is between one super rich country and one not so rich country, where there are a lot of adverse outflows and a lot of leakages. So those are my argument, my reasoning, my research. And if you look at it, to develop a high-speed rail connectivity, you must not look at it from only a financial point of view. Can this high-speed rail connectivity make money? Can it be financially viable? That is wrong. China doesn't use that method. China looks at it from the entire country's point of view, because the high-speed rail connectivity in China is so good. That's why the Chinese manufacturers, the Chinese companies are so competitive. They can be located in a very low-cost area and still be able to export their products or sell the products nationwide at competitive prices. You just look at the experience of Japan, France, Germany, China. They all focus a lot on domestic train connectivity. And that is one of the secrets of the success of these economies. So do this, Malaysian government, please move away from KL Singapore, focus all your attention on domestic connectivity. It will lift Malaysia up, and it will lift Malaysia up in an equitable manner. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed what I've said, and I hope it's thought-provoking. Discuss it, because it's a very important project. It will either trap Malaysia for many decades to come, or it will lead Malaysia to a much better future. Share, like, comment, whatever it is, please. Thank you very much for listening.